there's a lot in that clip. The Anthony Blinken, Tony. What do you think? That went right back to Whitney Webb and then squared it. There's a long history to
Yeah,
what's going on with Anthony Blinken in the Middle East right now today. Dude, his dad was the last call from Robert Maxwell, or not his dad, but the guy who raised him, right? That's pretty substantial.
right.
And then the Warburg Pincus connection, still yet we have to look into that. But like that's how that guy
Yeah.
is in that
So there's
spot at
Lewis
this time
Pincus.
in history. It's not because he aced his SATs, kids. Okay. So don't study harder, study smarter.
Yeah, it seems as though Lionel Pincus, who helped to start Warburg Pincus with Eric Warburg, had two sons, Matthew and Henry. So I can't find any connection with Lewis Pincus, who is uh, Jewish. Let me see what this said back here.
I
I'll
don't
bring
know
this
if the
up for everyone
audience
to
hears
see
it, but
here.
we
Give me
hear
a
it when
sec.
control room cues up a clip.
So there's New York Times. This goes back to Louis
Oh,
A.
he's a top
Pincus. This is
Zionist. They
what's
put
referenced
that
in
in the
Whitney Webb's book,
headline
61. Top
just in
Zionist dead.
case you wouldn't
Yep.
read it. They're like,
And
hey,
it
he's a
says
top
here,
Zionist. You should read this. Huh.
and this was on July 26, 1973. It's from the archives. Tel Aviv, July 25th. Louis A. Pincus, the key figure in the world Zionist movement, died in Jerusalem earlier today of a heart attack. He was age 61. Mr. Pincus was a chairman,
Is
or
this
was chairman
before
of
or
the
after the
executive of the.
CIA had the heart
Uh,
attack gun? I was just looking for where it is in the timeline.
it's actually would be
Khrushchev died
during
on
that
September
whole
11th,
situation.
1971, because
Was it the
Allende was
Church Committee in
71
1978?
September 11th. That was a Kissinger coup with US UK. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of September 11th
All right.
dates in history. Khrushchev's heart attack in 71, 72, Attica, um, and then Allende's overthrow. What was that called? Operation
Yep,
what?
that's correct. Uh, it's
Operation Condor.
something fucker.
Operation Condor. Yeah.
What was it?
6 days of
Is
the
it
Condor was the book. 3 days is the movie. Before we get to
what
Condor, we'll
was
have to
that?
get to
Oh,
Jimmy
what was the
Dore.
name? What was the name of
Toby
that?
Wong.
Oh, something. It was salacious. No, the name of the operation. It was funny. It's gingerly named. I think is um uh uh spacing on his name right now, but Whitney Webb's former partner. The detailed. So, anyways, um, yeah. So that I can't, and I guess going back to the point, I can't uh find a connection. It's an interest that there's an overlap, no doubt, because the Warburgs and Lionel Pincus certainly had connections with those organizations. It so happens that Louis Pincus seems to be a separate family, but still there's some overlap, just not familial.
Chile, September 11th, 1973. Right. And then Palestine, September 11th, 1922, British Mandate. You think these September 11th dates have anything? Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe it's just coincidence, Tony. Collecting coincidences as we go through. When did they put that wall up? Was it September 11th, 2009 over there in Israel? I'm just asking. And let me see if I had Khrushchev in here because I'm pretty sure that was his heart attack. That's not part of tonight's theme. Khrushchev's heart attack aside, there's a lot of September dates in this Anglo-American establishment milieu, so you got to keep them all straight. And remember, September 11th, 1922. All right, so now getting back to, do you have a comment on the clip before we move on, Tony? Sure. Getting up to like
Not that one specific. That was phenomenal. Sort of analysis of the recent situation of what is going on. Obviously, I like the way in which they framed Anthony Blinken, head the State Department, in regards to providing context to, and obviously when you go back to Maxwell, so much of Maxwell is
that says
embedded
Dirty
within Whitney
Bird all
Webb's
over
work.
it.
One Nation Under Blackmail. Oh yeah, it's an understatement, certainly.
One world under
Least.
blackmail. Almost like it's Grand Theft World. Almost. Maybe. Not quite.
Trying to find the.
While you're finding that, this book was mentioned, the Israel Lobby. Well, the topic, and this is the book on the topic, because the Mearsheimer Walt book, these are Harvard professors who wrote studiously about the Israel Lobby and its effect on our political system. and it is a treasure trove of information. Just watch one of their interviews talking about it, and then maybe if you're interested in the book. I also have books like this book. This is a very rare book, Bird's Eye View of Jewish History by Cecil Roth. I have a lot of Cecil Roth books because I have a lot of Rothschild biographies, autobiographies he writes in that milieu. And there were a couple interesting things in here, Tony. I was leafing through saying, is there anything relevant to the past
Johnny
week's news?
Vedmore, that's who I was thinking.
I didn't know about the relationship update, but sorry for not muting that cough. A Bird's Eye View of Jewish History. This book comes to us from the past. Let's get a date on it so we understand where it's coming from. This is copyright 1935. Okay. So Cecil Roth, he's an excellent writer. And there's a whole lot of history in here. So if you want, like, I don't trust the internet, so I buy old books and I read them. I read the Jewish Encyclopedia to try to understand this topic and the topic of Zionism, because I'm not trying to go around the world being ignorant. So table contents, a lot of good stuff in here. Palestine and its neighbors, right? They have some maps in here. This could be interesting, Tony. And as we get into the story,
Here it is. It was the wrong overthrowing, but it was the running of special covert operation, which was gingerly named Operation Fat Fucker. That had to do with the Egyptian regime. That was the 1950s. I was thinking of a different one, but still, yeah.
Go from Operation Fat Fucker to page 314. And this is the date.
Zabbatai Zevi. There's a messianic movement to the 17th century.
Right. So this is then an official history by Cecil Roth. Like, this is also in the Jewish Encyclopedia. And then you have to spell Sabbatai Zevi many different ways.
Quick.
Go ahead, real quick, because I'll get the brain.
If I may, get the brain out, because this is an important understanding historically. So the origins of Jewish messianism, like the sort of second or third wave of Jewish messianism, took place in like the early modern period, the 17th century moving forward. Zabbatai Zevi is one of a number of different self-proclaimed messianic figures to fulfill the Jewish prophecies, right? And so what's interesting is, so there's this overlap with this messianism slash sort of instantiation of the fulfillment of the prophecies with the idea of the creation and fulfillment of regaining control of the Holy Land and the Temple of Solomon, which maybe later, like
so all the ideas of political Zionism kind of come
Al-Aqsa Mosque from a mystic sort of messianism of the 17th century, which is intertwined with like the revelation or the reemergence of Kabbalism, which happened in like the 15th century. If I hope I'm remembering that correctly.
And that happened in Spain, I have on screen, and it comes to Frankism.
Jews. Yeah,
right.
Okay.
So it goes from Sabbatai.
Go ahead. Take it
over here, and in between Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank, you got Moses Hess. We talked about this book last week because this drives what's going on today.
Yes, you got it.
Not 1841. This is 1862. So there's a continued idea going on. And look, the British and the Freemasons,
Rome and Jerusalem. There you go. Right. See, so you get this like fulfillment of messianism, mysticism, sort of being instantiated in this idea of nation state and the rebuilding of the Temple of Solomon, which is an Al-Aqsa Mosque, a Temple Mount, all this corresponding overlap between secular ideals and mystic overlay theological ideals meshing as one.
Overlay an empire on that, the British Empire, and look at this.
Yes.
Boom. The Palestine Exploration Fund is a British society based in London. It was founded in 1865, shortly after the completion of the Ordnance Survey of Jerusalem by the Royal Engineers of the War Department, Tony. The fund is the
biblical archaeologists and clergymen who supported the survey. Oh my God, what the fuck?
The fund is the oldest known organization in the world, specifically for the study of the Levant region. They used to have the Levant Company, Tony, before the East India Company. They were running the Levant Company.
Yeah, that's right. That was the Turkish. That was the Turkish version.
Right.
Yeah, that was the Ottoman Empire version of the British East India Company, the Levant Company.
So when you get back to who started it,
I'm not sure the Sassoons tie in with that.
The people that left the fight, and they're just sitting in the background watching you guys fight, like red ants and black ants in the jar that they're shaking. This is a serious piece of evidence. Crowder, I'm sorry they didn't get it to him in school in Canada, but here in America, Americans who want to understand, we know how to look stuff up and read stuff. And I'm going now back to the Cecil Roth book, but that's the Palestine Exploration Fund. It's also in the History Blueprint. That's how I got that link. And that's why I have a map to these things, so I don't have to remember them all off the top of my head. Now, going back to Sabbatai Zevi, here he is. Then we go a little bit further. There's Moses Mendel's son. and the fall of the ghetto is the next chapter. And then we start to get into the New Age, 1815 to 1935. This is a period which we're studying because there's a whole lot going on. Benjamin Disraeli comes into the picture. He's working with, time after time from 1847 onwards, Baron Lionel de Rothschild was sent to Westminster as their representative by the electors of the city of London, but continued opposition of the Lords prevented the passage of legislation which would have enabled him to take his seat. Finally, in 1858, a compromise was reached. The House was being allowed to settle its own form of oath. 27 years later, the son of a protagonist in the struggle was raised to his peerage as Lord Rothschild, being the first professing Jew to receive that honor. He was allowed to assume his place in the upper house as a matter of course. So this is just part of history. The history they leave out is they're working with Disraeli to get the Suez Canal. I don't think that was in this book or not mentioned at this point. But also they get to Theodor Herzl and Chaim Weizmann and Baron Hirsch, who's mentioned in
The Disraeli.
Moses Hess's book.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Baron Hirsch was one of the financiers they were looking for. And I say that right there. Look at my 20-year-old note. Page 369 of Moses Hess. These guys are working together. All right, over here. Page 369 right here. A New World is this chapter in the New Age, 1815 and 1935. The new conception.
So here I brought up some of the clips.
Let me just zoom in. Let me zoom. Like a Nissan commercial, Mazda commercial, whatever that was. The new conception found its first prophet in a German thinker, Moses Hess, who had been through the whole gamut of assimilation. Returning in a premature old age to his own people, he pointed out in his Rome and Jerusalem, 1862, the insubstantiality of the ideal emancipation as an end in itself, and he suggested that the reconstitution of a political nationality in Palestine was the only solution to the undubitable problems of the Jew. Indubitably. Okay, I don't think I've ever actually had to read that word out loud, but thank you for humoring me and my dyslexia. All right, so page 370, they had the Hove Zion, the lovers of Zion, and auto emancipation in Palestine, and the work was embarked on hastily, was inadequately supported, but thanks to the constant and munificent assistance of Baron Edmond de Rothschild of Paris, the settlements managed to establish themselves on a firm basis. It's the Edmond de Rothschild Bank that funded George Soros's Quantum Fund in 1968, according to Washington Post, in an article that they won't let people see anymore. Anyway. Theodor Herzl, Alfred Dreyfus in Paris. Here's Herzl's picture right here. Little pencil drawing for you. Yeah, Cecil Roth. He breaks out the dictionary. He's an excellent writer. I have many of his books, and I enjoy reading when he's writing. All right. Though the effects of Bolshevism on Jewish life in Russia were fatal, abroad the Jew was stigmatized as though he were exclusively responsible for the new scheme of things. Now, there is a mention in here of the Protocols of Zion. No mention of Lord Northcliffe of Cecil Rhodes' Roundtable, who published it in English. 379. Moreover, Karl Marx, the prophet of communism, happened to be of Jewish blood, though baptized in childhood and brought up as a Christian. See, they're like, he's not ours. Hence, there was another excuse for identifying the Jew, already unpopular, with the dreaded system which threatened to undermine the foundations of the established order. It was seriously alleged that there was a universal understanding between Zionism, Bolshevism, and high finance. You might call that the City of London, kids. All of them aspects of a hypothetical Jewish international to secure the domination of the world. And a ridiculous farrago of nonsense, the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which purported to give an account of the proceedings of the Congress recently held in order to bring about this object, ran through edition after edition in every language, brought to you by the British. Right? So even though it's here's he explains it. Even the discovery that this egregious production was, in fact, an adaptation of a work written to satirize Napoleon III. I think it was written in like 1859 or something like that. We have to check the references. I have it over here. 3/4 of a century before did not entirely shake credence of it. So once upon a time, somebody wrote a satire, and then sometime later, they repurposed it in a way that was like the viral meme of its day. Let's say it like that. And here's a map. Let's see. The world distribution of Jews in 1914. So this is World War One.
That goes along with the Neil Ferguson's, like I talked about earlier, how they
where
were
I don't
either
see them, Tony,
assimilated
on this
or
map. See them in
in
America.
the Levant.
I don't see them in the Levant.
Heavy,
But that must be the
very much in
diaspora
Poland
from
and
the Old
Eastern
Testament.
Russia.
Or it's the Assyrians,
Excuse
right?
me, Western Russia, excuse me.
The Assyrians who expelled them in the diaspora. I was trying to. Those are the people that worked metal back in the day, the Iron Revolution.
Further
Diaspora
context,
for
there were other
300,
movements
Alex.
besides Zionism that was mentioned by a production that we played earlier on. Bundism was one, which was a secular Jewish socialist movement, but it did not focus on statehood, as it says down here. The Jewish Labor Bund did not advocate ethnic or religious separatism, but focused on culture, not a state or a place, as the glue of Jewish nationhood. So, of course, that couldn't be upheld. And there's also,
Oh, this is juicy,
there are a lot of
Tony.
different competing.
Well, I was just looking up. I was like,
Well,
what do
if
we have on file?
If you want to go a little cray, okay, hold on.
Well, no, I'm not going cray. I
There
just wanted
is
to
a
point
Greg
out
Reese video.
Lord Northcliffe.
Not cray, but
right here. This
the
paper, this was
Protocols of
distributed
Zion.
in a paper that this cat ran, and he works for Lionel Curtis, who runs Cecil Rhodes's Roundtable. So when they get to the gist of like this was circulated and it was psychological warfare, I'm telling you, like the same people we're talking about running psychological warfare today, their ancestors were doing it in this generation. Pilgrim Society.
Right. And interestingly enough, I don't necessarily say this.
Yeah.
This is correct. So, there's a lot of questions around the authenticity of the Protocols of Zion. There's also this supposed letter by Albert Pike that Greg Reese covers called 3 World Wars to Usher in a One World Religion. Very interesting. He does mention that whoever wrote this letter, if it's not Albert Pike, was very prophetic and obviously the Holy War origins of Friday the 13th. Maybe we'll get to those as later clips, but
I've always found that
so
Pike letter to be specious, just like the protocols.
Yeah, and so did I. That's why I didn't.
So here's Pike, and
just like the protocol. That's what I was alluding to as an analogy. It's like the protocols and species nature.
Right. It's like Iron Mountain document. It represents reality, but it's not. It's a
Confederate. Yeah.
It's a Confederate, just like these Confederates. I don't think I have that in here because I didn't consider it a piece of evidence that was actual and factual. But the interesting connections between Albert Pike and the ADL and Brith are fascinating, and that's a lecture for.
And that's what he goes over in the video, which is interesting.
Yeah, and then I also wanted to point out that
for the other video he had, go ahead,
who published the protocols, he had a secretary, and his secretary was called Douglas Reed, and he wrote a book. And
Douglas Reed, Controversy of Zion.
It's an interesting few passages because remember 1829, 1835. There's a lot of 1800s colonization before they make it a nation. That's all I'm saying. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you
with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.